Watching Business Nigeria, and of course it's a midweek edition, and let's just get into the conversation now, where we're going to be talking about the federal government's effort, which is aimed at revamping the economy amidst geopolitical tensioned economy. And I understand that we have our guest who's going to be joining us now is joining us on the conversation. Is the founder and chief consultant of B. Adedipe Associates Limited, Mr. Biodun Adedipe. It's good to have you join us on Business Nigeria.
Very much. A very good afternoon to you. I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, good afternoon to you. And it's really interesting how we get to talk about the federal government's effort at revamping the economy, which is like the fulcrum of, all of some of the things that President Bola Tinubu, had said about a year ago. And we're counting down to 2 years now of his administration. And fingers crossed, people are just expecting to hear really what has the President Bola Tinubu's policies, how has it really revamped the economy? And I just wanted to help us, put it into perspective and present like the current state of Nigeria's economy, of course, staying with the fallout of the policies of the government.
All right. Thank you so very much for that. I will start with the fact borne out by data and, of course, observations that the Nigerian economy today is in a better place than where it was some 1, 2, 3 years ago. So, and when you look at the indices, it is very, very clear. Number one is that it is on a steady growth trajectory, which means that there is nothing like a step in growth and then a reversal. So it's growing steadily. And of course, if you look at the growth pattern also, it is picking up and improving quarter after quarter. But not only that, if you move over also into fiscal operation, that is how government generates revenue and how the government spends it, there has been an improvement in that space as well. And my key reference here is the interplay, we call it nexus, economic discussions, between revenue and expenditure on the one hand, and then between oil revenue and non-oil revenue. No doubt oil revenue has deepened a lot more. So which means those sources of non-oil revenue have also deepened since this particular administration came into office. So that, of course, resonates very well with an analyst like me, who has always believed that if truly we are going to diversify our economy, it's not so much as to do with how many sectors we have activities happening. The economy on its own is already diversified. Where the challenges have been is in terms of our foreign earnings and also government revenue. So with respect to government revenue, there has been an improvement. If we also come to talk about food inflation, yes, it is easy to say, look, we have only seen this happen because we rebased the inflation rate, that is CPI. There is a lot more than that, because inflation rate will measure the rate at which prices are increasing, which means the moment the increase slows down, there is already a gain in inflation, which is good news to investors, whether local or foreign, all right? But what is more important is whether the prices of basic consumables today compared to where they were some months ago, or maybe 2 years ago, where are they? Yes, it increased significantly in the last 3 years thereabout. But in recent months, some of these prices have come down. And so it means then that we're actually in the right direction. Whether you want to measure it in terms of inflation, in terms of government revenue, in terms of how the economy generally is performing, in terms of growth. So it's in the right direction.
I'm just wondering, what for you are the specific economic reforms or policies would you direct it to? If you take a look at how the government is implementing it, for you as an analyst, what economic reform or policy would you say is translating to the growth we're seeing now in the economy?
Right. Very, very important question you asked there. There is a bouquet of reforms that this government has introduced. Of course, the major ones is what everybody talks about there, but there are a number of others that are creating this traction and, of course, movement in the direction that we want to see. the one we make so much noise about is first subsidy removal. I won't even call it removal. I would say implementation of that policy. Because if we talk about removal by law, it was done by the previous administration. All right? But now that is on the one side. The second one is unification of the exchange rates, which of course made the naira value to move from sub 500 naira to $1 to over 1,500 naira to $1. But in recent months also, you notice that the naira exchange value for the US dollar, our major trading currency, has stabilized within a narrow band. And that is what matters to businesses, especially for planning purposes. Okay, that's on the one side. There's also the aspect of fiscal consolidation, the reform done in the area of fiscal operations, which has also resulted in more money pushed down to the sub-nationals, where state governments now and local governments have more money available to them than hitherto, which means we are now directing more resources to where actual development takes place. So that also is a major gain. There's one not many Nigerian analysts are even talking about, and that is consumer credit. Okay? There's a reform this government has done in that space as well. For me, it's a vital one, because consumer credit is very key to reviving the middle income class. And that is the spending army in any economy. So once you revive the middle class, you're expanding the space for consumption, and that drives a lot of economic activities, especially where most of what they consume are things produced locally, which is the beauty of the reform the government did in that space, which says we make consumer credit available, but cheaper than what we normally get in commercial lending, but to give you access to items produced in Nigeria. You want to buy furniture with consumer credit under this reform, you will have to buy furniture made in Nigeria. You want to buy automobiles, they will be the ones assembled in Nigeria. You want to buy television sets, you want to buy any digital device, maybe a phone, a tablet, whatever, they must have Nigerian content to qualify under the consumer credit reform that this government has done. Fantastic. Of course, education as well. The NEL fund, student loan, which is also a good one from my own perspective, because it brings back what people like me enjoyed when we were in university in the 1970s, the student loans, as we call it then. So which means that as of today, indigent students can have access to education without having to worry about school fees on the one hand, and then even sustain us well in school. So all of these are different planks of the reforms, and of course there are several others that involve blocking leakages in government revenue. All of these are coming together to make the economy, in my own assessment, going in the right direction. What now remains is the speed, which I think this government will likely consider for the next 2 years of its being in office.
We've also seen the government, of course, focus on agriculture, of course, with support from the African Development Bank and some other development partners. And we also see that some northern states are improving production. Production has improved in that particular side of the country. But what is your outlook for the sector, particularly when we have an unstable, if I would call it that, unstable geopolitical the politics, the geography, climate change on one end, politics on the other end, insecurity on another end, also affecting production. What's your outlook for the sector?
Beautiful. Now, I will take it from the aspect of agri as a sector of our economy, where the data has proven that there's a whole lot more happening in crop production than we had paid attention to. We only made reference to agri as the dominant sector contributing to our GDP. So that what has been done more recently is to identify crop production as a major component of that. Then another aspect of reform is what this government has done with respect to livestock. So now, if we take those two subsectors alone, putting so much resources and efforts into revamping them and raising productivity, we do a lot of good for our economy. And for the following reasons. Number one is the fact that it is a major contributor to GDP, as I said, Number two, the fact that they create jobs in the process. And of course, if you intensify that, it helps you to fight food inflation, which has been the major macroeconomic headache for Nigeria over the last couple of years, almost 10 years now. So if we do that, it means we can produce sufficient locally to take the power out of food inflation. And of course, it means you produce more food. So that ticks the first box of food security, availability. The second one now is affordability. So they are moving in the right direction, in my understanding. If we continue this and we are consistent with it, we may see food inflation drop to maybe single digit in a couple of years. And of course, Nigeria becomes food secure. And once we get to that, we need to worry now about increasing productivity, not only in that sector, but other sectors of the economy. So for me also, agri can only get better in Nigeria. And we can see the signals. When foreign investors come in and invest in that space, it's a sure signal to you that the potentials in there are now within fingertips. So, and the more effort you put in there, the most likely agri will now be more of business and not just as we saw it in the yesteryears, as either a pastime or for subsistence. So truly we are looking at agri as business, and that will play out in terms of better life for the citizens.
But, you know, most of the people, of course, in the agri space have talked about the inconsistency of, particularly investors, they've talked about the inconsistency of policies, the multiple taxation, particularly at the borders, before it gets down to the consumer. Even for those transporting from the north down to the south, the frequent checkpoints or places they have to settle some individuals before they get to the final consumer, also affecting the price of goods. And this forms some of the geopolitical issues that I'm trying to talk about. And for you, would you say that Nigeria, you know, is on the right path? Or if you would advise the government, what would you say they can do to take some of these bottlenecks off the road so that investors can smile to the bank at the end of the day?
Well, like you said in your earlier question, challenges within that space include security, no doubt, all right? And of course, mentioning now non-state actors that also extract money in the course of the logistics. I think what will help us more in this instance is to continue to encourage our security agencies and also empower them in terms of resource support. That's on the one hand. Then also, more importantly, is the fact that, yes, a lot is happening in agriculture in the north, but also we must pay particular attention to what is happening to agriculture in the south, where herders put in their livestock into farms and consume farm produce in the south here. That is something also the government must have the courage to address, in which case, as it has announced a new policy on livestock development and handling, that should be implemented rapidly and complemented also with the fact that we need to cultivate food all over Nigeria. If you look at several agri clusters in Nigeria, there are different agri produce and food crops that thrive throughout Nigeria, you know, variously. We must come to terms with that in looking forward, that as much as possible, whatever you produce within your own geopolitical zone should be able to take care of whatever is needed within that zone, and the excess, of course, becomes business that can cross the state borders. So which means we have to pay a lot more attention to logistics and also the constraints that are in that process. But the government has also done well, I must mention this, in reviving river basin authorities, because that speaks to the issue of climate change, all right? And of course, the need for irrigation systems that will enable us to do all year-round farming. And of course, at the same time, also address the issue of one section depending on the other. It is that dependency that creates challenges. If you want to overcome that, then every zone should be able to develop what grows naturally within its own terrain. And so there shouldn't be any security issue that will now create a pattern that appears a deliberate destruction of what is produced in one section. And that's the geopolitical issue in that. So the government must have the courage to address all of these issues.
I'm hoping they're hearing you, sir, but let me put you on hold while we go on this commercial break. Here, and we have the chief consultant and founder of B. Adedikpe Associates Limited, Mr. Biodun Adedikpe, talking to us about the present state of Nigeria's economy and the fallout of the policies of the President Bola Tinubu's government. It's good to have you stay on with us. But let's take a look at the improvements we've seen in the CBN reserves, net foreign exchange, and of course the foreign reserves. What do you think is responsible for this positive, and how sustainable are these policies?
All right, very good one. Now, what we call accretion to reserve is a function of different so many factors playing across each other. The most fundamental is the interplay between capital inflows and outflows. Now, when it comes to inflows, we're talking about one, what you earn from your sale to the rest of the world, and then also foreign investors that come either by way of foreign direct investment, where they create businesses here with such funds imported, we call it capital importation, or in the other hand, what we call foreign portfolio investment, those who want to invest in instruments. And of course, those ones usually are temporary in nature, which means it will remain here as long as investor confidence is sustained. If that is not sustained, they will go out. So now, all of those playing together, we now add loans to it also, in which case you are credit worthy and are able to borrow also from sources outside of Nigeria. Now, the aggregation of all this will define your inflows. The outflows will now relate to investors, especially portfolio investors that take out their money. That will also talk to loan repayment. That will also talk to debt servicing, that is foreign. And of course, your import, which is the big number. Now, the interplay of all of this will determine whether there be accretion to reserve, that is, your reserve increases or not. But we must also put in this conversation the fact that we had a lot of issues in the previous administration in terms of managing our foreign exchange basket. Let me use that word, in the sense that there were a lot of leakages then, things that were not being done properly, that are now being set in the right direction. So plugging leakages also is part of what accounts for what we see today. But not only that, I will also mention this, for a period between 21-22, we actually had no, inflows from NNPC, which of course is a major earner of foreign exchange for Nigeria. So when you put all of this into the equation, the improvement in managing all of these elements is what we can see now today in the numbers. And of course, with foreign investors also confident about what is happening in Nigeria, you see a steady inflow in that regard. So that is why we see now this improvement has taken us to about $23 billion US. Compare that with our regular import bill monthly. That puts us in a comfortable position of more than twice the minimum required to sustain investor confidence. So that is why we have what we have now. Now, going forward, is largely hinged on sustaining investor confidence, especially when you have a global crisis that the current tariff war is triggering.
Yeah. Mr. Biodun Adedikpe, thank you so much. Is the founder and chief consultant of B. Adedikpe Associates Limited. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Nigeria.
My pleasure being with you. Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's always a pleasure to have you on the